Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon and good evening, wherever your time zone will find you during today's event. Thank you very much, Shreya, Kunal, and everybody else for this invitation. I will go straight into my presentation now. So my name is Ali Hussein, as Shreya has mentioned, and today I'll really be talking about policy and regulatory conversation around Africa. One of the key things that most, especially tech players, are not paying attention to is this issue around policy and regulatory question in Africa. And you are finding that a lot of startups, and especially fintechs, are finding themselves on the wrong side of regulators across Africa. So how can we bridge this gap? How can we ensure that we are playing a role across the continent that takes into consideration the policy and regulatory frameworks, takes into consideration the startup ecosystem, takes into consideration customer perspectives on protection against hacking, on protection around privacy. These questions are key towards the growth of the ecosystem across Africa. So we are seeing a situation that is quite interesting. Africa is at the throes of a major transformation in the financial services ecosystem. You can see incumbents are being appended, and you'll see where this is happening, which are the key players. Incumbents are also disrupting startups. In Kenya, some of the biggest banks like Equity Bank, KCB have fully fledged fintech ecosystems. In Nigeria, players like GT Bank and Access are starting to play a key role. EcoBank is also in the conversation. Yet, as all this is happening, startups are also worth more than some of the major banks in the continent. So what's cutting? What are these strategic pressures that are causing all this? And what is the role of regulatory frameworks? I will be talking about all this in my presentation today. But first, some of the key players. And this, by the way, is by no means exhaustive. So if you are a startup player or fintech entrepreneur and you've not seen your logo here, please forgive me. You know, the ecosystem is evolving so fast that sometimes it's really not easy to keep pace of who is who and what is going on. So I'll be covering three key things today: the state of the African fintech landscape, the policy and regulatory landscape, and then I'm going to leave one slide for you, as in what next? Where do I see things moving going forward in the next 5 years or so? So, a number of key factors are driving the phenomenal growth in Africa's fintech ecosystem. First, 42%, this is a projected growth in Africa's 15 to 24-year population by 2030. Africa has the youngest population in the world. Around 65% of the population is under 35 years old. Africa also has the world's fastest growing middle class, with the middle class population forecasted to reach 1.1 billion, or 42% of the population by 2060. Urbanization is also causing a lot of potential and problems. So this is an issue that, as Africans, as players in the ecosystem, as policymakers and regulators, we must keep our eye on the ball. 4.5% bank branches per 100K people in sub-Saharan Africa. against 31.5 bank branches per 100K people in the US, for example. I would say this doesn't really matter from an African perspective because the markets in Europe and in the US are sort of different from the markets in Africa. First, you have a situation where we have new rails across Africa, and I'll explain this as we move along. In the more developed markets of Europe and the US, the big players in the payment ecosystem, Visa, MasterCard, have become really the key rails of how payments are moving along within the financial services ecosystem. In Africa, we are seeing the advent of completely new players who've never been in the financial services sector, but who now consider themselves fundamentally players in the financial services space. In my home country of Kenya, the biggest player in this space is M-Pesa. M-Pesa is so dominant in the financial services space that there is no bank in Kenya today that can have any meaningful mobile banking play or mobile banking strategy without using M-Pesa. So bank branches in Africa are important. I see them playing a completely different role as you would possibly see in more developed markets. This conversation is sort of more solidified by the next point that I'm about to make. 80% of Africa's population is mobile, 36% internet penetration. So for players who are playing in the African market or coming into the African market, this is an important statistic to note. So if, for example, you have a mobile banking strategy, you must think about USSD that goes concurrently with the mobile banking apps. And banks in Africa are playing this role pretty well. Again, in my home country, Kenya, you will find that mobile banking goes, the app and the USSD are tightly integrated. They go hand in hand. Second last point is 66% of sub-Saharan Africa's population is unbanked. Again, we have in-depth conversations around what it actually means to be unbanked. This is a conversation that must change. The way traditionally people think around unbanked, honestly, where I'm sitting doesn't apply in Africa anymore. If you have an M-Pesa bank, rather an M-Pesa account, does it mean that you're unbanked? Will these guys ever actually have a traditional bank account? So this conversation, we need to review it. We need to have a serious discussion around what it means to be unbanked in Africa. Last but not least, 46 billion remittances, that's way back in 2018 before COVID hit. So during COVID, it took a hit, but 46 billion is interesting. But this is inflows into sub-Saharan Africa. And that brings me to my other issue. How about intra-Africa? We need to start tracking our data. We do not need outsiders to come and tell us what our data looks like. And this is something that players now are starting to really think about. Players that are starting to think about fintech education, players that are starting to think about data as a key component of fintech going forward. After the Africa Free Trade Zone, in my humble opinion, will be playing a key role in this going forward. Key factors, again, here's an important statistic for you. The majority of Africans do not use typical payment cards, FYI. Only 15% pay with typical international card schemes. I hope Visa, MasterCard, American Express, and the rest of them are paying attention to this. 85% pay with African payment methods. These include M-Pesa. In Nigeria, we are seeing a very interesting drive towards payment banks. So we are going to see lots of stuff happening. Safaricom's entry into Ethiopia is going to be super interesting to watch. Here are some interesting headlines going around Africa, and every morning you are seeing new headlines. SVB-led 100 million investment makes Cheaper Cash Africa's most valuable startup. Flutterwave has raised 170 million with a bid to connect Africa's digital payment landscape. And by the way, Flutterwave is currently in new conversations to raise more money at a $3 billion valuation. Stripe acquires Nigeria's Paystack for 200 million. There are more of these conversations going on across Africa as we speak. Here are Africa's latest fintech unicorns, and all of them are fintech unicorns: Wave, Opay, Flutterwave, Fowry, Interswitch. So interesting times for Africa fintech. Big tech is starting to cast a long shadow on the continent. And if you think that Amazon is not interested in Africa, think again. They've just plunked billions of rand for their swanky new headquarters in Cape Town in South Africa. Pay very close attention to this gentleman here called Jeff Bezos. Let's now quickly look at the policy and regulatory framework. 20th century, the world was complicated. My colleagues, 21st century world is complex, not complicated. You know, a few years ago, nobody would have thought that a telco would cast such a long shadow in the financial services sector. Telcos across Africa now are beginning to realize that this fintech ecosystem is an interesting play. Fintech has opened up financial services value chain. It's leading to increased access. Remember my conversation around the unbanked? Unbanked, according to who? According to Africans, according to the World Bank, according to IFC, according to the World Economic Forum, or according to Africans? We must ask these tough questions, because this is important where I'm sitting. How you frame your conversations is how you're going to deal with your problems. If you're framing your conversations and your questions that are not aligned to what our issues are, then we are going to be solving the wrong questions. This has triggered deep changes to the existing market structure. In Kenya today, for example, M-Pesa is regulated by 3 regulators. The Communications Authority of Kenya, that gives Safaricom its mobile money license, its telco license, its content service provision license, CSP. The Competitions Authority of Kenya, which looks at the discussion around whether Safaricom and M-Pesa are dominant players. Now, unfortunately, this term dominant has now become a dirty word, but that's a conversation for another day. The third regulator is the Central Bank of Kenya. The CBK allows M-Pesa into the payment services or payment ecosystem under the National Payment Act. So you can imagine an established player like Safaricom has a full-fledged policy and regulatory arm that spends 24 hours a day making sure that they have the grasp and the tempo of what policy makers and regulators are thinking. Now, as a fintech startup, what are you going to do? You don't have the muscle that the big players have, that the incumbents are. So associations are starting to play a key role. The Association of Fintechs in Kenya, of which I am a founding chairman, the other national associations across Africa are beginning to play an interesting and key role. Then we have our umbrella organization, the Africa Fintech Network. These associations bring together all big and small players. And we are respectfully asking for a seat at the table when policy and regulatory discussions are being had in the financial services sector. And we're asking respectfully because I want to repeat my most favorite analogy that I like to talk about. You must ask for a seat at the table. As you are walking into a restaurant, if you don't have a seat at the table where people are having lunch, dinner, or breakfast, there are three things that you can be at that table. One, you are either at the seat, rather at the table, having breakfast, lunch, or dinner with all the other decision makers. Two, you are serving as a waiter or waitress, which basically means you are overhearing conversations, but you have no say in anything. All you are being told is, this is what I want to eat, bring me a drink, and so on and so forth. So you are a spectator, basically, and smelling all the good food and, you know, all the interesting conversations going on at the table. Last and worst is that you don't know, but you are on the menu actually being eaten. I ask everyone listening to me today, where would you rather be? There are four key issues that are at the mind of everyone today. Not least of all policymakers and regulators and the big players. Regulatory concerns. As a player, as a new entrepreneur or old entrepreneur or established player, these are concerns that we must face every day. Customer concerns. Hackers are preying on people. Policy issues around privacy. Now, privacy is becoming such a huge conversation. But where I sit, there are two key issues around privacy. Number one, regulatory issues. If you do not take care of privacy concerns of your customers, regulators are going to come down on you. But that's a reactive conversation. I would like to spend a little bit more time and talk about the strategic imperative of players in the fintech or financial services ecosystem, making sure that their customers trust them. So we're talking about trust here. If your customers trust you with their data, guess what? They will remove more money out of their wallets for you. That's a strategic imperative. Technological concerns. Technology is changing every day. Some regulators across the Pan-African landscape would demand that every time you're thinking about changing your core banking system, changing your omni-channel channels, that you inform them and you take them through the conversation. Now, this is important because one key technology platform today is in the face of everybody, and I'm talking about blockchain. And when I'm talking about blockchain, I cannot complete that conversation without talking about cryptocurrencies. I'm not going to delve into what that means for regulators, for customers, and all that, you have the picture of what I'm talking about. Last but not least, market system concerns. What do I mean by market system concerns? We are now moving beyond platforms, the Google platforms, the Apple platforms, the M-Pesa platforms, and now starting to talk about ecosystems. And I would love to have a different session where we're just talking about where I sit, what is the difference between platforms and ecosystems. What next? This is just my last slide. This is where I see the future looking, where financial services are. When you're talking about financial services, this player here, this guy who plays in the ecosystem and is plugging into the ecosystem with APIs, with open banking platforms, serving investing, trading, and brokerages, serving wealth management players, whether it's fintech or incumbents, loans and credit and mortgages, crowdfunding, insurance, insurtech, cryptocurrencies, payments, remittances. This is where the game is at. I leave you with a question. Where are you playing at? I want to thank everybody, and I want to thank BFSI for allowing me to be a part of this very interesting conversation. Thank you very much, the team at BFSI.